Why, hello there. My name is Kris Abel, and welcome to Hey, All You Zombies.
Hey, rock that out.
There you go. My co-host over there is a zombie celebrity, or Zed-lebrity, Mr. Richard Krause, author, of course.
How's it going? Buy my book. That's my last shameless plug for the show.
Buy your book, yes, which continues to get rave reviews from the Chicago Tribune.
I know, it's crazy, right?
I know. Yeah, it's
It kind of blows my mind that something that I sat here, staring at this screen, writing for a couple of years, every now and again I get those Google alerts, and it's like, the Hollywood Reporter's written about you, the Chicago Tribune, Entertainment Weekly is writing about your book. I was like, I just can't believe it. I can't. And we're going into a second printing now. The book is called Raising Hell, Ken Russell and the Unmaking of the Devils. We're going into a second printing now, and we're making some slight little tweaks to it. Not so much the text inside, but the back cover is going to be different to reflect Guillermo del Toro's love of the book. We're finally getting his quote on the back, which is cool.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I can't believe. I mean, second printing after 1 week.
I know.
Unheard of. Yeah, it really is crazy. This week, our episode is going to be devoted to the subject of superstition. So I hope you got your fingers crossed. I actually have a very good feeling about this episode because of that. Last night, between the two of us, of course, Richard is the true expert of superstitions. He is more superstitious than I am, so you've had more first-hand experience with it. So last night, I was doing research on superstitions so that I could bring something to the table.
Right.
And got hungry, got peckish,
yes.
Decided to leave my little high-tech wizard tower here and went out to grab some food. And the woman who was serving me food, as she was doing so, I noticed there was what looked like a smudge, some ink on the underside of her arm. Thought about it, decided, it's probably a tattoo, but should I ask? Should I not ask?
Right.
You don't want it to turn out to be like a Holocaust serial number or some sort of imprisoned camp thing. So I said, can I see your tattoo? And she smiled, and she lifted it up, and printed along her arm was the number 13.
Well, we'll see. 13 in many cultures is not an unlucky number.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and it was really cool the way the 13 was written, and she smiled, and she explained that she had been born on Friday the 13th.
Oh, cool. And
so, actually, it's been a bit of an issue for her all her life. She says she runs into people who are very superstitious.
Right.
There are some people who react very negatively to that kind of a thing. For her, getting a tattoo was a way of kind of, standing up and saying, I'm okay that I was born on Friday the 13th. I'm proud of it, so I'm rocking the tattoo. There you go. Which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, no, and to embrace it, I mean, nothing you can do about it.
No, it's who you
can't change your birthday. It's who you are. I like that.
Well, and it's surprising. It can be very difficult at times when you do reach or encounter somebody who's being superstitious because you don't believe it at first. You think maybe they're kind of teasing you. In fact, today I brought an umbrella.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
That I'm opening
you crazy
up.
bastard.
I know. I'm just riding the edge, taking all the risks. That actually was a real crazy moment at my time at Canada. I had to showcase an umbrella like this. This one's a high-tech umbrella. If I press the button, it lights up like.
Oh yeah, so the stem lights up. They're cool. Very,
very cool. And we had planned to do a segment that was on spring gadgets, and I had a number of things, but the big showstopper, it was all built around having this high-tech umbrella. And I came in, as I did first thing early in the morning, about 6 a.m., started to test out my stuff. We were minutes away from going on the air, and both Bev and Seamus completely freaked out that I'd opened an umbrella in the studio. And, I mean, it was really over the top, very dramatic. I laughed because I thought they were merely teasing me or pulling my leg. When I opened up the umbrella again, they, just went into a real tizzy and a panic. Like, how dare I was putting the whole show right into jeopardy. The absolute turmoil. Really, it was like it was like having a friend for many years that just dressed me right down. How dare come in here and do this sort of thing. And for me, confusing because I don't have a segment if I don't use the umbrella indoors. Right. So I'm looking at them like, just go with me on this one. We'll get through the segment. Everything will be fine. We did. Thankfully, the studio didn't burn down. But it's interesting. You do encounter those kinds of things with people who you wouldn't expect.
But see, I think the superstition isn't just opening it indoors; it's holding it over your head. You can open an umbrella indoors, because but I don't think you hold it over your head.
Well, I mean, the practical reason you would open an umbrella indoors is to shake the rain off. It's bad to leave it fold up all wet. But also, I mean, my view was that we work in show business, which is a long-standing tradition of using parasols and umbrellas, that it's surprising to kind of see that superstition there. I mean, where would singing in the rain be if people were freaking out over umbrellas being opened indoors? But
in show business, though, I mean, I was, last night, I was at the Winter Garden Theatre in Toronto. I was a judge for an event called Humor Me, which raises money for at-risk youth. We raised $600,000. And it was kind of an interesting thing. The first half of the show was CEOs of companies. Like one guy manages a portfolio that's like $10 billion. Billion with a B, not an M.
Wow.
And he did like 5 or 6 minutes. They have mentors, real comedians that mentor them, and then they do 5 or 6 minutes of stand-up, and we judge them. And then the second half of the show was Dana Carvey. He comes out and brings it home. But backstage at the Winter Garden, a very old theater in Toronto, it used to be a vaudeville house, and it was a movie theater. Now it's a legit theater again. And it's interesting because I was thinking about it last night as I was walking around. All the superstitions, you don't mention the name Macbeth in a theater. No. And if you do, you call it that Scottish play or whatever. And there's all sorts of like things you have to do, spin around 3 times and rub your head, and I don't know what all the things are. But actors, I think in particular, and I guess team players like sportsmen are also very superstitious. That's why you see people with beards during the playoffs and that kind of thing. So all that stuff that you might think is a little nutty is, I think, a little bit more widespread than you think.
Right, yes. Well, and I guess that's what I'm going to find out this week. Now, each week we also have been playing a fun little game called Battle of the Monsters, and this is a special edition of our Movie Pistols at Dawn for the month of October. We asked you last week to choose what we thought was the strongest monster between 2 pairs. Our theme was the 1970s, and we chose sharks, meaning Jaws specifically, and zombies, meaning Night of the Living Dead. And not too many people voted. Maybe you're not into interacting, you just want to look at us. I know we're very pretty. But, those who did, the clear winner was Jaws.
Interesting. Now, because I would have thought zombies would have taken it. And again,
yes.
I'm not, I'm just interested to see what people think. But this week, everywhere I've gone, there has been zombie stuff. This is a picture that I took on Queen Street. It's an advertisement for a Halloween DJ, like a show on Halloween with a DJ called DJ Lazarus. But it's David Bowie as a zombie. And like it's every time I turn around, and I'll tell you a little bit more later about how I got to hang out with the king of the zombies earlier this week. But everywhere I've gone, there's been zombie stuff. Everyone's talking about The Walking Dead. These pictures that I just showed you. The zombie walk is on Saturday here in Toronto. They're just everywhere, so I'm a little surprised that Jaws was the winner here.
Well, I think, in the subject of, I guess, fear of monsters, probably sharks are more terrifying to people than zombies.
Those are real.
I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas zombies have become cultural icons, where they're almost friendly, even though they are disgusting and kind of, terrifying if you've got the right movie. Right. Say Walking Dead or something like that.
Well, I saw Land of the Dead earlier this week, and that movie is scary, but it's also funny. And that's something that goes along with these zombie movies. There's quite often, particularly in George Romero's films, there's a lot of humor in them as well.
Right. Well, and it's satirical in a sense. He's trying to be observant, not just trying to shock you or entertain you, but trying to make some observations. And how did that go? How's George?
Well, I hosted an event with George. We screened Land of the Dead, and it was mostly for film editors. It was thrown by the Canadian Cinema Editors, CCE, and it was mostly for editors, but we gave away some tickets and other people were invited. And I was amazed at the people that came. It was so interesting to see the film editors who are all over the map. There's really straight ahead ones and really kind of freaky guys, and they're all over the place, right? So they were all there. But then the fans that showed up, there were people that came in three-piece suits, and there were like the hardcore guys with mohawks and stuff that showed up, but they were all had one thing in common, is that when George Romero walked into the room, everyone was like, "Oh, the man has arrived!" And there was a guy who I don't know who he was, a young guy who came, and I was talking to him just before the show, and he said, my birthday is in 3 days, and this is the best. He said, this is maybe the greatest night of my life. I get to be in the same room with George A. Romero. And he didn't disappoint. We screened Land of the Dead, which is one of the films that he shot here in Toronto. I'm just going to bring up a picture here from the event. And this is George, the editor in the middle, Michael Doherty, and then me on the end. And George was lovely in the way he speaks about the movie. But, I think people have this idea about him that, he sits at home on his throne of blood, drinking, spinal fluid out of a cat's skull. And he's not that guy. He makes these extraordinarily scary, creepy movies. He is a pioneer in the world of zombies. But his favorite movie is Tales of Hoffman, which is sort of a 1940s Michael Powell movie that all about classical music and opera. And he's a very sort of gentle guy who happens to make these insane movies. And it was really fascinating to hear him talk about that, to hear him talk about how when he goes in public, invariably someone has a zombie movie that they've made that they want to give him. Look at it, George. Write to me. Tell me how great it is. And he says, most often he said he doesn't really look at them all anymore because there's too many of them. He doesn't have time. But that so many of them that he gets aren't about anything. He said, his movies are all political commentary, or they're commentary on consumer culture, or there is a larger socio-political bent to everything that he does. Whereas, so many of the zombie movies that his acolytes make and give him, and that they've made in their backyards or they've shot on their own video cameras and stuff, are just simply gore fests. And that's something that doesn't really interest him terribly. He wants the movies to actually be about something and to be, thematically and visually and everything else different every time out. And if you look at all, there's really 6 of them. Night, Dawn, Day of the Living Dead, or, first of all, it's Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and then there's Land of the Dead, Survival, and Diary. I may have gotten the order mixed up there. But each of those films has a different feel to them, and that's something that he brings to it. And, his idea is to make one zombie movie every decade, and that way to reflect the decade that has just happened or the one that's coming. And so that way, when you look at them as a whole, you get sort of this history from the 1960s all the way through to whenever he stops making them. And it hasn't quite worked that way, but it's sort of interesting to look at them. And Land of the Dead, which I didn't love when it came out, is interesting to me because it seems to be more timely now than when it was released in 2005, because it's all about these dispossessed zombies who are taking back something from the extraordinarily wealthy 1% who live in Fiddler's Green, which is this protected zombie-free zone. So it was interesting that we did this event last Tuesday night, which was just a day or so after the year anniversary of the Occupy movement in Toronto.
No, completely, yeah. I mean, it's funny how, I guess it's one of the problems of making a movie that talks about something that you think is prescient, is nobody's going to get it at the time that it comes out.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it now, it's fantastic.
Well, and it's way funnier than I remember it being, and certainly the jokes are there. If you find a priest with kind of a zombie bobblehead that attacks people funny, you're gonna laugh. You're gonna laugh at this movie. But he was so much fun to talk to. Michael Dougherty was great to see the two of them together, sort of reminiscing about how to get the movie made. And George, he's really upfront about a lot of things about working with the studios that he's worked with in the past and the benefits, and then the flip side of working with a studio is that you're just a cog in a big machine. Even though you're a legend and you are the director, you are a cog in a very, very large machine. And you don't always get to. It's just because you're the director doesn't mean that it's predestined that you're going to be calling all the shots. And so he was very upfront with that. It was a fascinating thing. I will post on the HeyAllYouZombies.com website part of the conversation that we had. It's about 10 or 11 minutes. And then there's a much longer video that I'll post another time when it's all ready to go that has the whole Q&A. It's about an hour long.
Wow, cool. Okay.
Yeah,
that'll be good.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that. And speaking of zombies, this past weekend was World Zombie Day. And so around the world, you had all sorts of cool celebrations. Now, here in Toronto, we wait. Our zombie walk occurs on the 20th, but you have other places. Winnipeg and Manitoba, I believe, both had their zombie walks on the past weekend. But important, speaking of George Romero, his hometown, Pittsburg, they have a huge celebration on World Zombie Day. And what I like is they go beyond just having a zombie walk. They have a bunch of events that they organize, which includes a ugly pageant. They have people all lined up, which I thought was quite cool. The Zombie Olympics.
Oh, cool.
Which included shot put, where contestants were given like a dismembered body parts, like a head or an arm, and then everybody had to compete to see how far they could toss it.
I love that.
There was a zombie shuffle race. What was interesting is one zombie failed to actually cross the finish line. He was going so slow and having such a hard time. He actually came in first place. He was deemed to be the winner of that race. And a couple of other things. But the one event that really worked best out of them all was the brain eating contest.
Oh.
And I'm throwing up a photo here. Yeah, so what they do is, and it really, really went down very, very well. They had a long, huge table, lots of contestants all sitting there. It's like a pie eating contest. You're not allowed to use your hands. They have this massive plate with a huge raspberry jello brain that you have to dive into. And to really make it hard, the raspberry jello has little bits of gummy bears and gummy worms frozen inside. The judges heckle you while you're eating to try to get you to really vomit and throw up. It went fantastic. The decision, I don't know who chose to go with raspberry jello, but it worked so well.
Well, it was a good choice. I'd like to think that someone put a lot of thought into that. They experimented with a few other flavors and colors,
Yeah, it's fantastic because people choke on it, and you get these little flecks of raspberry floating all over on this white table. It just looks absolutely disgusting.
Wow.
Anyway, so that's a frame from a YouTube video that I found that actually recorded the event. I'll throw that on the HeyAllYouZombies.com website.
Well, it's funny. I just wanted to bring. You're talking about George Romero and Pittsburgh and the Zombie Walk. Somebody asked him on Tuesday night whether he goes to the Zombie Walk here in Toronto.
Right.
And apparently this year, some of the cast members from the original Night of the Living Dead movie are going to be there.
Oh, cool.
Someone asked him, "Do you go?"
Yeah.
And he said he just kind of smiled, and it became quite clear. And I said, well, there's no way you could. You'd need a bodyguard. You would need 20 bodyguards. He would get torn apart. Can you imagine if George Romero showed up in the middle of the zombie walk in Toronto? The chaos that would ensue. Romero does not go to the zombie walks because he would be torn apart literally by the very people that he gave birth to in a lot of ways by creating the modern zombie movie. So if you're going to the zombie walk in Toronto on Saturday, if you've been to any of the other ones, don't look for a tall man with big glasses because he's probably not going to be there.
No. Well, and it's sort of the same problem that they have with Comic-Con. There are certain personalities, say Kevin Smith, for example, that if they show up, it just becomes a real issue for everybody else to try to have a good time. And then at the same time, I think, the whole point is that it should be for the participants to try to sort of have their good time. And let's see. So let's say that you are going to get into a high-stakes poker game.
Okay.
And I mean high stakes enough that you might lose an arm or a leg.
Ooh.
Well, you might want to try. Bicycle is offering this year as a Christmas, gift that you can buy for your zombie friends, the Bicycle Zombie playing cards. What I love about this is not only do the cards have all the sort of different zombie characters that are involved in terms of the kings and queens and jacks and that kind of thing, but many of the cards actually contain survival tips.
There you
find yourself in a zombie apocalypse. So this is actually a really good deck of cards to throw in a knapsack for your emergencies or anything like that. You end up playing during that downtime as you're waiting for the helicopters to arrive.
But that's right. But you see, I'll tell you, here's another example. Like, how is it possible that Jaws beat zombies when there's like paraphernalia? I don't know. I just don't get it. I would have thought zombies in our poll would have been hands down the winner.
Well, we'll find out today how people feel about the next item that we've got set up. Yeah. And then finally, one last zombie thing I wanted to talk about. Speaking of zombie movies, and I kind of agree that we're at the point where we've been inundated with so many low-budget or poorly made zombie movies that you could say, look, we never need to see another zombie movie again. Well, there is one. There's one I really need to see, and that's The Goon.
Oh, The Goon looks cool.
The Goon is very cool. If you haven't seen the clip that's online, The Goon is a comic book written by a man named Eric Powell. It is a series, very comical series that takes place during the time of Prohibition. The Goon is the big guy in the back, and the front guy is his name is Frankie, and they speak in that same pattern that you would have for monsters at that time. It's not about it's not about money. It's sawbucks. It's clams. It's hey Nathan, what you got going here? That kind of thing.
I love that.
Well, David Fincher has wanted to turn that into a feature film.
Wow.
And he actually had partnered with Blur Studios, which is one of the top animation studios in the world. And a couple of years ago, they got together, and David Fincher said, look, I'll try to get the money men, I'll try to get some Hollywood studios on board, we'll do a whole kind of thing, put together a pitch. They actually made a short clip. It's about 90 seconds to a minute long. The Goon is played by Clancy Brown. Brilliant casting, big, huge, deep voice. You may know Clancy Brown from Highlander movies, one of my favorite movies, but also the deep bass voice of Mr. Crab on kids will know him, on SpongeBob SquarePants, that kind of thing. But also Frankie is played by Paul Giamatti.
Oh,
an incredible job of playing that smarmy, smart ass. These two guys. The clip that they've got out there is of Frankie sitting in a bar. He's trying to scam drinks when the Goon comes in and has him babysit this zombie that the Goon has grabbed and tied up. And the zombie's all scaly. He's got a dead fish hanging out of his mouth and all sorts of stuff. And Frankie is annoyed that he's saddled with the task until he realizes that the zombie actually has a wallet in his back pocket. Opens it up. It's full of money, so we then ensue what hijinks that Frankie gets up to with the zombie in terms of entertaining himself all night long. The zombie becomes his drinking buddy. It's hilarious. Well, they made that clip. They showed it at Comic-Con. They've been shopping it around to all the movie studios, and it's a big, fat no right now. It's just not going to happen.
And why is this? Do we know?
Apparently, it's a combination of many studios feel that the amount of money that would be required to make a fully animated film is not going to be justified when it's only going to be adults that are coming to see it. If this was a Pixar-style film,
much more kid-friendly,
that kind of thing. So years have gone by. There's been enough frustration. David Fincher, Blur Studios, Eric Powell have now taken to Kickstarter. And so there is a Kickstarter page where zombie fans can go and donate money to get the Goon made. Now, it's not about making the movie itself, all David Fincher at this point is looking for, he wants $400,000 to do what's called a test reel. That's where they take pencil tests. They want to make the entire movie as a pencil test to be able to find backers for it. Of course, with Kickstarter, you don't know. They may end up getting the entire budget. There have been video games right there that have earned as much as $3 million, $5 million towards the production.
Yeah, and musicians that have, said, I need $100,000 to make a record, and ended up with $1.2 million and all that sort of thing. Yeah. I can't remember what her name was, but yeah.
Well, I will put up the actual animation that they have, the test animation that they've done on HeyAllYouZombies.com, plus a link to Kickstarter. I think it's not only great in terms of I want to see this movie.
Yeah.
The comic book is fantastic. The casting, Paul Giamatti, Clancy Brown, you couldn't get a better couple of individuals to do that kind of stuff. But also, I mean, I remember a time in which animated adult films was quite a well-established genre. You think of the age of Ralph Bakshi.
Yeah. Felix the Cat, stuff like that, yeah.
Heavy Metal, all those movies. And then that kind of ended. And I don't know if it was Cool World that put the final nail in the coffin or Heavy Metal 2000. They were really bad. But I would love if Kickstarter were to become a venue for that kind of genre to bounce back. And we might actually get some proper adult entertainment in animated form.
Well, I just think it's so interesting that David Fincher is going to Kickstarter. The idea that the guy makes Academy Award nominated movies, the whole thing, but still wants to do something a little bit outside the box. But, so many people now are looking for alternative ways of financing their products, having more artistic control by coming up with ways to get the money themselves. I know filmmakers in Canada that do things that if they want to make a small film or a short film, an experimental thing, whatever, they'll throw a big party. And you pay $25 to walk through the door, and if you get enough people, you get enough money to get the ball rolling anyway. And I think it's really interesting that people aren't just relying on studios or in Canada Telefilm or all the other sort of regular outlets, that they're actually looking beyond that, because that money is slow to come and it takes a lot of effort to get it. Not that raising money the other way doesn't take a lot of effort, but it's an interesting way to really be a part of every step of the process, and then likely not be answerable to the people that just wrote a check for here's your $50 million. So
completely,
I like it.
It'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops, and then maybe that's a venue for even George to kind of go to get some of the projects that he wants up and running.
Right. Yeah, no, I think so, and I think he's got any number of movies that he wants to make at any time, George Romero, and so it'll be interesting. I mean, he's still very much a going concern. So we haven't seen the last movie from him, not by a long shot, even though he's got this legacy already, and people know the zombie movies and love them so much. But there'll be more, and I don't think that they'll necessarily all be zombie movies coming from him.
No, I would love to see him go back and do something with Martin. I thought that was a fantastic movie, and that could be something that could be reinterpreted as an animated film, for example, if you got a Japanese animation company.
Yeah.
The way that they did some of the animated sequences for Kill Bill, I mean, you could really approach Martin, I think, with a very pulpy graphic novel feel, and it would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would be fantastic, yeah. Yeah, it's funny, with the Night of the Living Dead, arguably the most famous movie that he's made, and due to a little paperwork glitch, it's in public domain. Yeah. He doesn't make any money from it. It hurts me to think about such a thing.
All right, so we did promise that this was going to be about superstitions. For the last week, I've been trying to think if I have any superstitions, and I've come up empty. So I'm going to.
You're a man of science,
I am in a way, but I mean, even then, I think it's sort of something that you develop from childhood. So there are men of science who have that kind of thing. But so I'm really keen to hear you talk about your heritage.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I was sort of started to say last week, I grew up in a very specific part of Nova Scotia called the South Shore. And people in and along that region have a different accent from people that are from any other part of the country or any part of the province. There is very specific things that happen there, and there's a very specific sort of way of life. And particularly, I haven't lived there for 30 years, but I think back when I lived there, it was still it didn't feel to me like it had really entered into present day just yet, in the most charming, quaint, and interesting of ways. And one of the things is that people are down there are superstitious, or certainly were when I lived there. And we've all heard red sky in the morning, sailors take warning, red sky at night, sailors delight. And these kind of sayings to me were just part of virtually everyday conversation as I was growing up. These weren't, the crazy old lady, getting on the street that would cackle at you, red sky at night, This was just something that, that people talked about, quite openly. And that whole area, Queens County, Lunenburg, where the Blue Nose was built, which is right next door and where I was born, and beyond, are very superstitious. And so there was a book written by a guy called Vernon Oikel, who's a writer from down there, called Red Sky at Night. And I'm part of it. And he asked me to talk about the superstitions. And, I mean, listen, there's hundreds of them. And it's funny because I wouldn't say, if you asked me, I wouldn't say that I was a superstitious person. But I would never, ever in my life put a pair of shoes on a table. And not just for sanitary reasons. It's just not the thing. You're inviting terror into your home if you do that. So just don't do that. And
not even if a brand new pair of sneakers that you need to put laces on, and you're looking for a convenient spot just to kind of throw them and lace them up. It's just.
Andrea came home the other day with a new pair of shoes in a shoebox, and as you walk into our place, the dining room is sort of off to the left. And she walked in and she threw the box on the table, and I was standing in the kitchen looking over, and I was like, and I thought, just bring it back. Hold on to what you're feeling here. And I couldn't. I ran over and I was like, what are you doing? And she, of course, had no idea. And the shoes were in a bag, in a box on the table. It wasn't even just that. So,
wow.
So some of these have stayed with me. But there are some nutty ones that I've heard that I don't subscribe to, but people down there, and a lot of these superstitions, of course, because of the ocean, which is the predominant thing when you grow up down there. The ocean is, whether you're a sailor or a fisherman or not, it is a part of your life. It influences virtually every aspect of your life. And so a lot of these people have superstitions that are born of that. But the Nova Scotian mittens that sailors would wear were always made of white wool. And sort of, I'm reading this now. Mittens of any other color were thought to bring bad luck, because there's the story of a captain of a fishing schooner who, after discovering that a member of the crew had brought gray mittens with him, turned the schooner around and returned to port. That's how superstitious people are. Wow. The offending mittens were removed from the vessel, and then they could go on and go back out.
But, I mean, if you have white mittens and you use them on a ship, they're going to get dirty. They're going to become gray.
Yeah, well, it's possible. Yeah. But, see, the idea here, the thing that, because fishermen are so, and sailors are so superstitious, gray gloves were, in those days, and maybe still are, I don't know, worn by undertakers. And so you were inviting that kind of, bad vibe on with you.
Wow. Okay.
And so there's loads of these superstitions. The one that I contributed to the book, and again, this is another one that's very common down there, is the crows. And I don't know if anyone, up here in your Upper Canada, I don't know if anyone up here knows this, but, as you're driving along, if you see one crow, that is a very bad thing. Because the saying goes, 1 crow sorrow, 2 crows joy, 3 crows a letter, 4 crows a boy, and it goes on. There's probably some old person down there that can go, 157 crows means that, they have the whole thing. And people down there, you see it, and what you will see is, if you see 1 crow, you will see older people do this. They do this, and they kiss their thumb at the crow. Really? And and that negates the bad luck that could possibly come along with it. I don't know what it means. I don't know what the kiss thing is all about. But that's a very common one down there. And I mean, I kind of love the folksy charm that a lot of these things have, and I do find it quite fascinating. And as I say, I wouldn't really consider myself a superstitious person, but I don't walk under ladders because only fools do that. I don't walk under ladders. I don't really love the idea of a black cat walking in front of me, and these aren't things that I think about, but I've been thinking about it because I knew we were going to talk about it, and it is true. Like, I'll find myself walking around a black cat without really thinking about it on the street.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's very, very cool. And they call a group or a gathering of crows a murder. Right. So
which is
yeah.
But again, see, I don't really understand then why one crow would be sorrow if a group was called a murder. Right?
Yeah. Well, I guess
there may not be a lot of logic behind this, as you may have guessed from these superstitions.
No, and I guess the idea is that the one crow is a bad omen, an indicator that others will follow. It's kind of, I don't know, I guess it's like when you see a drop of water in the stream, it might become a, wow, that was interesting. Yeah. Might become a huge flood. So, I guess, the one crow is a trickle of bad things that are coming.
Right. Okay, now I'm just looking up here. Okay, a common superstition is that bad luck will come to a person who places shoes on a table, whether in the form of a family argument or risking death to a family member. So this is very serious stuff.
Wow, okay.
And now, even among those who are not superstitious, shoes can be associated with contamination. And some sources ascribe the origin to the fact that criminals were hanged while still wearing their shoes.
Oh, okay.
It may have something to do with death, and that the idea of placing a new pair of shoes on a table would signify that someone had just died, or that you would have bad luck for the rest of the day, quarrel with someone, or lose a job. So, they all these superstitions, to my mind anyway, seem to trace back to death and sort of ideas surrounding death. So, like the Undertaker with the gray gloves, or the thing, and some of the connections may be a little tenuous, but I'll tell you, they've stayed with me.
Sure. Well, if I had to think about the shoes, I would. Historically, shoes have only been really valuable more recently, say in the last couple of centuries, because they've been really well made, and that would be the one article of clothing that people would tend to steal more than anything off of a dead body.
Right.
So maybe that's kind of the association. Often that phrase, "a dead man's shoes."
Well, you never put a dead man's shoes on the table.
Right.
Yeah. Only a nut would do that. Only a nut would do that.
So that's interesting, and a lot of that comes from, I guess, sort of a maritime background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you have to remember that, these superstitions and, sailors and people coming in from all over the world. And so these superstitions are kind of the result of years of immigration and people coming and going and folklore and oral tradition that have created these, frankly, kind of insane things that people live their lives by.
But did your family subscribe to a lot of these superstitions? Was it something that your neighbors did?
No, like, it's the funny thing. My family didn't, except that you would never put a pair of shoes on a table. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we ever discussed any of this. It's not like, it's really bad luck if you step on the threshold of the door when you walk out, witches are going to come. I don't know. Like, none of this was ever discussed. But, you had it in the back of your mind.
Right.
Why tempt the gods? I lived in a town that was very old, and there's a graveyard right in the middle of town. There's a bunch of them, but there's a graveyard right in the middle of town that has gravestones that go back to like 16 whatever. And it is claimed that if you run around the graveyard like 3 times at Halloween at midnight, the devil appears or something. I can't, but it's if you ask anyone from the town, they'll be like, oh yeah, the cemetery on Main Street, you don't run around. I mean, who would run around that thing? You don't want the devil to appear. Like, people know about this. It's not an obscure legend that the old folks whisper about. This is something that people know, and accept as fact.
Right. Yeah, and it's sort of, I guess, tradition or part of the identity of the town itself. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Okay, so I've been doing some research on the topic, and also, I mean, there are things that I remember specifically about things like fear and phobia that I kind of wanted to share. I thought you'd be very interested in.
Your scientific debunking will not make me put shoes on my table.
I'm not debunking. I'm showing you things that I think are very fascinating.
Right.
So there are a couple of scientific experiments that were kind of interesting. Going back, say, about the 1920s and 1930s, people tried to grasp or tackle the idea of fear and phobia. And the one question that was asked, is this something that you were born with, or is it something that you learn as you get older? That was the real key question. And there was a man named J.B. Watson who worked at one of the universities, so Johns Hopkins University. And his theory was that it's not something that you're born with.
Right.
That although you are born with instincts for fear, meaning that if lightning were to strike, or you had a large animal in the room and growling at you, your instincts would of course kick in for survival. But you weren't born with, say, a specific fear of snakes. You weren't born with a specific fear of clowns. The problem was how he could prove that, how you could set up an experiment. And so what I'm going to talk about is something that's highly unethical, very shocking today.
Okay.
I'm mentioning this even though, I mean, our show is called Hail You Zombies. So if you are of a sensitive nature, chances are I figure you're okay because of the name of our show, but I'm just warning you, I'm going to show some images that may be a little unsettling.
Okay.
And this is something that many people discuss about today, very, what the ethics were. It's an experiment that wouldn't be performed today. I'll say it that way. What he did was he tried to find someone who hadn't yet been exposed to the world enough to develop fears. And so he took a 9-month-old baby.
This doesn't seem right already.
No, I know. Named Albert. There's Albert.
Oh, Albert. So
Albert
pure, so innocent, cute. So young.
Yes. And he brought Albert in with a wet nurse, as you can see in the back, holding him. And in this room, introduced Albert to a number of things that most adults would be afraid of. So in this photograph, what they're giving Albert is a box full of newspapers that have been set on fire.
What?
Yes, that's what you're looking at there. It's hard because this is black and white.
Yeah, but you can see right down sort of in the front here.
Yeah, and as you can see, Albert does not react with fear at all to the flames. In fact, he reacts with interest because it's bright, it's colorful, it's moving. There is no born fear of fire. That is something that you learn. You have to touch it for the first time and have your mom say, ouch, hot, hot, don't touch, that kind of thing. This they would do over a period of time. They would bring Albert in, they would introduce him to these objects, and wait to see if he would ever show any signs of fear. In addition to the flame and other things, they also introduced him to animals. So this is Albert with a little rat that's in between his legs. And as you can see, Albert has no problems that there's a rat climbing all over him. In fact, it becomes one of the highlights of the experiments, that when Albert comes in, he's got this cute little furry creature to play with. He likes the rat a great deal. In addition to the rat, they also introduced Albert to a large menacing dog, to a monkey. They had...
This is so outrageously unsafe.
I know.
Monkey, an angry monkey. We're going to put Albert with an angry monkey. It'll be awesome.
Completely. They also had one of the assistants come in wearing a very menacing clown mask, very frightening. All of these things Albert did not react to in any way other than, being a baby going, wow, this is interesting stimuli. I'm kind of keen on it. So the next step is, the next week they would repeat this again. But when they did, they had a man stand behind Albert with a steel pipe and a hammer, okay? And when they brought in the object, the man behind would hit the steel pipe and creating a loud, shocking disturbance.
Right.
And this is one of the things that even if you're born, you will recognize when there's a loud disturbance in the room. And so Albert would immediately be disrupted. He'd be a little uncomfortable. He's unsure what is going on. And that's when they would once again hand him the rat, hand him the dog and the monkey and that kind of thing. And they did this for a long period of time. And it got to the point where poor Albert was really upset with what was happening. They were really making him uncomfortable. So then they began to stop making that noise. They got the guy with the pipe to go away, and they began to introduce those objects once again. So even though now there's nobody behind Albert making him frightened or afraid, he really gets upset when they bring the rat back in, or here's a rabbit that they've got for him. He should be very happy, but he's not. Clearly unhappy and upset. And so the theory is that over time, poor Albert has become conditioned to the point where he now has a phobia of clown masks, rats, rabbits, to big dogs, monkeys, and boxes of fire and other things.
Boxes. Who was Albert's parents? Like, who were his parents that would allow this to happen?
Well, as you can imagine, I mean, this is something that people who go to university and study psychology, there is a lot of people interested to know more about poor Albert.
Yeah, what happened to him?
He just doesn't exist on the historical records. There has been one cemetery gravestone found where they think that's the resting place of Albert, but in terms of any information upon the man's life, of what this experience at a very young age must have done to him, there's no information about that whatsoever.
Wow, you can only imagine that one gravestone. If it says something like "I'm afraid of everything" as his epitaph, maybe then, you know, here lies Albert. He hated clowns. We don't know why. You know, man.
Yes.
That is outrageous.
Yeah, completely. The early days of science are not something to be terribly proud of. There were lots of. You don't want to know what Pavlov was up to.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's interesting in that it was the wrong methodology to try to explore the situation, but it did prove the underlying principle that we aren't born with these fears.
Right.
If you meet someone who's afraid of rats or they're afraid of snakes, that's something that somehow they have picked up.
Right.
So if you have a phobia or a fear about something, then, you know, there's the association where at some point in your life you've seen rats and either an older brother or sister or a parent made a big fuss about it, and that was repeated enough times that now you yourself feel that very anxiety every time that you see that creature or that situation.
Wow. I mean, see, I still think, I mean, Albert notwithstanding, that there must be some kind of instinct, though, still. Like, and I only think, and this is unrelated, but you know, just in terms of instinct, years ago I had a little cat. I had a cat named Francis, and he was an amazing, awesome little cat with a funny little overbite, and he was brown and had a little white tuft in the front, and he was a Norwegian forest cat. I didn't know that when I bought him. I bought a cool-looking little cat that, you know, from the corner, whatever. Yeah. And he was a lovely cat. We had him for a long time. But I found out later on he was a Norwegian forest cat, and he stalked things. But it wasn't, you know, we never lived in a house. We never had mice or anything. So he would stalk a desk, or he loved mushrooms for some reason. He was stalk. But that instinct was him. He was bred hundreds of years ago to stalk and hunt gophers, I think, and pull them out of their holes. That's why he has this weird little overbite. And bring them up. But that instinct was still in him, even though he virtually had never been outside. We adopted him when he was a little older. He had never been outside and didn't want to go outside. He loved being inside. So he lived his entire life inside and had very little interaction with anything other than other cats, but still had this instinct. So somewhere in us, I think, there is an instinct for fear, maybe, or an instinct. Maybe it's the instinct for fear that's in us, and then we have to be taught what to be afraid of.
Right. Well, I think what happens is that emotions, the emotional part of our brain, can be very strong to the point where it can overwhelm the rational side of our brain. And so that's where you can get these interesting sort of conditions that arise. And there is this belief, anyways, that there is an instinctual animal part of our brain.
Right.
Our brains are very wired towards patterns and pattern recognition. You walk outside, you look at a faucet, you might see a face there. We're really good at sort of noticing patterns and correlations.
And you know what's like around the corner from me here, there is like a fire hose outlet. It's old. There's a giant old building next to it, but it's got every time I look at it, I see. In the configuration of, like, there's two bolts, and I see a face.
Right.
I see the pattern, and I see it every single day. Everybody look at it and go, no, still there's the taste again every day.
And that's something that kicks in terms of our learning process, in that there are times in which you may recognize a pattern. You've performed a certain action, and there's a corresponding result every time you do it. Now, it may not really be the real explanation for what's happening. So a maritime myth, for example, is that you can cure scurvy by simply touching soil.
Right.
Sailors often believe this. Of course, the reality is that in order to touch soil, you have to get off the ocean, and the moment that you're on land, you're eating better, and that's the real explanation. But that correlation, that pattern had repeated enough that it became sort of a unique habit that is formed. What's unusual, though, is that we develop an anxiety about it, where we simply don't want to risk changing that habit to try to correct it. It's just, the anxiety takes over, is very, very fearful. It's like, no.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's that thing, right? If this thing that I do every day, this OCD thing that I do, if I do that every day and then something good happens afterwards, of course, I'm going to do that every day.
Well, apparently, I was reading online, and again, this is bad information, but it might be true. Jennifer Aniston, the actress, will not board an airplane until she's had the opportunity to touch the outer hull of the airplane with her right foot.
What?
Apparently that's this thing. She has to do that in order to feel safe that the airplane's not going to crash. Serena Williams has to bounce the tennis ball 5 times before she serves it. Lots of little factors like that.
I mean, I can see the bouncing the ball 5 times. Whatever, you're out there saying the touching the foot to the hull is a little beyond, I think, being reasonable. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes I think those are just tricks to restore confidence, tricks to kind of feel yourself comfortable about something that's going to have anxiety. But I'll share with you a very interesting experiment that people have repeated several times. After Watson and the years had gone by and people started to get a little more ethical in terms of their experiments, there was a man named Skinner who began to perform similar experiments with pigeons. And it wasn't so much about fear as about learned behavior. And that he could teach the pigeons that when you get a certain response, then the pigeons would get food. So push down on the lever, you'll get food. You push down on this lever, you'll get water. But he would take it to the point where he could get the pigeons to do all sorts of crazy things. And one of his tricks was to unveil a series of pigeons, and each pigeon had its own strange quirk that it would do before it would eat. There was one pigeon that would turn in a circle 3 times before it would be fed, another one that had to look all the way to the left, as a demonstration that to these pigeons, because of the conditions of which they had been raised, in their minds, it made sense that if you turn around 3 times, food will appear. There's no consciousness to question the fact that maybe it's not really required. Just that's what you have to do.
That's
part of the process. But to take it to an entertaining sort of spot, there are 2 researchers in England that did an interesting experiment with goldfish. 2 goldfish. All right. So the first goldfish is set up in a fish tank, and they get the fish to associate a soccer ball with food. Every time the soccer ball appears, fish gets fed. And then they manage to, in little baby steps, get it to the point where if the fish pushes against the ball, then it'll get food. And they keep going until they got a soccer net on one end, on the north end of the tank. They put a soccer net, and when the fish manages to push or nudge the ball to that soccer net, it's rewarded with food.
That's awesome.
To the point that all you'd have to do is put a soccer ball in the tank, and the fish would push that ball to the soccer net.
Because they want to get fed.
Right. But that's fish number 1. And they do that with fish number 1, pushing it towards the net on the north side. Tank 2 has a net on the south side. And again, same process to the point where the fish pushes the ball into the south net to get food, right? When they've gotten to that point where it is repeatable time and time and time again, they then create 1 tank with 2 fish goal nets on either side and 1 ball. And sure enough, let me pull up the image here for you. What happens is the 2 fish compete to try to get the ball. They play soccer to get the ball into the other net in order to be able to get the food.
That's crazy. This reminded me of the pigeon thing. Reminded me of something, and I mean, it's not learned behavior, but it is unethical, crazy, bad things to do. Yeah. Colonel Tom Parker, who was Elvis's manager, Elvis Presley's manager for many years, was a Kearney guy before he became a manager, and he became very famous for his dancing chicken show.
Oh no!
And so it wasn't the thing where he trained these chickens like these other people who have spent a lot of time teaching fish how to play soccer. All he did, he had a little stage, and he'd put the chickens on the stage. The chickens would stand there, and then pretty soon they'd start to do this weird little herky-jerky dance because he had a hot plate under this little stage that he'd turn on, and the stage would get really hot, and they would sort of look like they were dancing because they were just moving their feet to keep off the heat.
Yes, that's
not right.
Evil. That's
not
dark.
Right. That's very
not
evil.
Right at all. So let's see a couple of fun things that I found out about superstitions around the world. In Turkey, it is considered a wish will come true if you say it 40 times.
40?
40 times. 40.
You have to really want something.
You have to really want something, and you better make sure that you don't have an older brother or sister who's going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
That would be really, really bad. Right. Dead donkeys. Donkeys are considered. There was a period in time in which people really esteemed a lot of value to donkeys. They were thought to be very sensitive creatures who, like elephants, would know when they were going to die. They were thought to hurt each other, that kind of thing. So the idea was that donkeys, apparently, it was believed, it's not necessarily true, that they would go off and find some gentle little place to pass away.
Right.
So it was felt you would never see a dead donkey. It was just considered rare. So if one did show up, you should jump over it 3 times if you came across the body of a dead donkey, or make a sandwich out of the hair of a dead donkey, to cure a cough.
I could use that because these hauls that I'm taking aren't doing the trick. I need a dead donkey. Or donkey hair sandwich.
Or sprinkle their toenail clippings over your enemies.
Yeah, no, see, like, that just seems to me like, disrespectful. It just seems like, what's the shittiest thing we could do to our enemies? Donkey toenails. Yeah. That'll get them. That'll show them.
Where's the other one I was looking at here? There was it's the hawthorn flower is an interesting one because people didn't really know much about it, what was happening scientifically, but the effect is very unusual. Hawthorn has a chemical in it called phthalmalide. Anyways, I had it written down, but it's a long word, all right? And these flowers, they would bloom usually within the month of May. And when they bloomed out in a field, okay?
Right.
Beautiful, gorgeous field, intermingled with all the other flowers that are out there. You have the breeze coming in. It would emit this chemical. And this chemical happens to be in human semen. It's one of the things that comprises the scent of human semen. Right. And so this flower ended up getting the association with fertility and love. And people would go out into these fields and gather up these flowers and just be put into a wonderful mood. Young men would say, I'm going to bring this home to my mistress because, then it'll put her in the mood and we'll have a wonderful night.
I'm going to bring the semen flower home. Yeah.
But you take it home, and when it's indoors, it's now isolated from all the other plants in the field. It's now in an enclosed space where you don't have a lot of ventilation. That chemical builds up and becomes very pungent. And it's also the same chemical that is present when a body decays that helps create that scent.
Wow.
There's that unusual link between birth and death right there. And so it's become bad luck for anyone, much like your shoes, to bring those flowers into the home because it's considered to be a reminder of death.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, as we said earlier, all these superstitions, or a great many of them, are about death. It's not, something bad's going to happen to you. It's like you are going to die, and it's going to be unpleasant in the way that it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll finish off with 2, I guess, of the biggies that are right there. So the first one I'm going to talk about what as most people consider to be the unluckiest date of the year, which is Friday the 13th.
Right.
That young woman who had the tattoo in her arm. And actually, that's more of a Western belief. In Japan, the number to avoid is 4. If you go there in Japan, there are buildings that don't have a 4th floor, that, you know, much like we don't have a 13th floor. In actuality, the unluckiest day is actually Monday the 27th.
Oh, and why is that?
This is based on information provided by insurance companies.
That's funny.
Of every day in the year, Monday the 27th is the day they will have the highest number of accident claims. And it's all sorts of different accidents, not just automobiles, but stuff that happen around the home. The theory is that usually Monday the 27th follows after a long weekend.
Right.
It's the time in which people have been drinking heavily or are just out of sorts and they have to go to work in the morning, that kind of thing. It's one of those days. And then the other interesting superstition that most people have, of course, and I'll lift up here, is the black cat.
Oh, yes. Well,
I got a black cat on my shirt here.
Listen, I'm telling you, you crazy bastard, get that shirt off.
In fact, there is an animal that is really unlikely to come into contact with. It's not the cat, but, you know, just as cute. I'm going to put it up here. There it is.
Is that a honey badger?
It's a marmot.
Oh, a marmot.
A marmot is like a woodchuck or a groundhog, we would call it. That's the Mongolian marmot. It is, in the history of the world, the #2 most dangerous animal.
Really?
Yeah. #1 is the mosquito, because the mosquito carries malaria. It's killed more people. But that cute little guy you're looking at there is responsible for the death of more than 1 billion people.
Is that Black Death?
That's Black Death. This is the guy that first contracted the virus of the bubonic plague.
Right.
When he developed it, it's much like a human being get it. In fact, they still carry it today, in that they get the glandular lymph nodes appearing underneath the armpits and then the groin. They initially would spread it by coughing. So it would.
if you're on the subway and the marmot next to you is coughing,
get away! Run!
Don't offer him a halls. Do not get or a Cepacol. Don't do it.
There are really weird superstitions around little tiny vermins. I don't know what it is, rodents and that kind of thing. For 300 years in the United Kingdom, it was legal to hunt and kill hedgehogs. In fact,
they're so cute.
I know they are. They're adorable, and little boys would be sent out into the fields to collect them and bring back the heads of hedgehogs, for which they would be paid 1 pence each. But for 300 years they were hunted, and the reason was that it was held as a very strong belief amongst farmers that hedgehogs steal milk from cows.
Right. I've heard this, I think. Yeah, and it also strikes me that, you know, Brits with their sort of, you know, particularly twisted sense in those days of how to rear kids, you know, how to raise kids, you know, they'd make up some sort of like weird little tongue twister about hedgehog heads, say it 50 times in a row. I bet you can't.
Well, it's bizarre because I can't figure out how hedgehogs would steal milk from cows. They're very small. Cows are very tall. The udders are well off the ground. Not only that, but they can't hold much milk. They're so small.
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyways, I mean, for many, many years, poor hedgehogs were killed left, right, and center under that belief. Today, even though people tend to look on that as being foolish, there is this massive movement in England right now to kill badgers.
Right.
Under the belief that they give tuberculosis to cows.
Really?
Really. My Twitter feed has lit up in the last couple of months with all sorts of Brits that are going on about how ridiculous it is that you have these municipal counties, they've hired people to go out and kill record numbers of badgers under the belief that they're giving tuberculosis to cattle. Scientists have gathered reports that they've given to the government that show that during the years when you have the lowest population of badgers, they've had the highest number of tuberculosis cases amongst cows. And still, it's a widely held belief that if we kill the badgers, the cows will get better. Right.
Well, I don't buy that.
No.
I don't buy that.
It's the shoes on the table.
It's the damn shoes on the table. Although, you know, it was so surprising to me, my reaction.
Yeah.
When Andrea came and put the shoes in a bag that were in a box, and she was very casual about it. I'm like, are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? And they weren't there for very long. They weren't on the table for long enough for anything bad to happen, so I think I rescued us from something really terrible happening. So.
You've reinforced the behavior, and potentially you could teach it to Andrea. So
she'll never be putting shoes on the table again.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to finish off with our Battle of the Monsters, and I'm losing my light.
It's getting really dark. I keep looking out the window. It's about to get insane outside, I think.
I think we've certainly done something because
somebody put the damn shoes on the table.
I opened up the umbrella. The skies are kind of coming after us.
Yeah.
But our next battle for Battle of the Monsters this week, and I'm going to see if I can find that photo. I wanted to find a really good one. Okay, it's not in my screen share docket. Let me pull it up here. But we are looking at monsters that represent the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
And the two that I thought that did that best. Oh, come on. Where'd it go? I saved it and it's gone. Oh, there it is. Haha. Open. There we go. Screen share. Click. Here we are. I love this painting. Aliens versus Predator.
Yes.
Here they are. I love this painting of them playing chess. That's just fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think two of the most iconic and original monsters that were conceived in recent years. I didn't want to put up the poster for those stupid movies that they made, reducing something that's so terrifying and psychological to wrestling. It's just crazy.
And now, for you, what is it that makes them terrifying?
Alien for me, it has to be the. I think it really is the alien nature. That what you're looking at with the alien monsters is that it's something that's biomechanical.
Right.
It's something that the fact that its blood is made of acid. It's not just something that looks alien, but it's presented as being something that would be completely different from anything else that we have on the planet.
Right.
And I think that there is something very primitive about the way that the jaw pops out. The transparency of the dome of the head, the insect-like sort of coiling and snake-like coiling of the tails, and all that. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think for me, it is the idea that they are very large versions of something that you would normally step on if you saw it on the street, or go out of your way to avoid. They're sort of like part insect, part scorpion, or something, and there's something that's sort of intrinsically evil, and I think that the sleek look of them as well is there's something menacing about it. They're sleek looking. They move quickly. There's something that just doesn't feel good about them. They are the stuff of nightmares.
Mm-hmm. And the Predator, which created by Stan Winston, is fantastic. I just think so well done. We've had a lot of people create monsters that sort of have components of it made up of animals from the animal kingdom, but there's something about the Predator that I think just has such great, stunning character and personality. The fact that it's got dreadlocks, the mandibles that are kind of like a crab, the whole mythology behind it, the fact that they have this tribal sort of...
And it looks like it's wearing armor, too. Yeah, it's cool.
That Caribbean kind of look to it. So what we've asked, again, is that you go to our website, heyallayouzombies.com. We're going to put up a poll. You can choose one of the two to kind of be the strongest monster creation. And then next week we will move that on. We're going to take all three of the winners from the past 3 weeks and try to decide upon one monster for Halloween for the year 2012.
Wahoo! Well, before you plunge into darkness completely, and whatever is going to happen out here, maybe it is the apocalypse. Maybe I did leave the shoes on the table for too long. I don't know, but I think I have a feeling that I caused this, and I'm sorry to everyone. So, thank you for watching. Go to the website, heyallayouzombies.com. Check out the web poll. You have to vote so that we can have a clear winner at the end, and we can finally put this to rest. One way or the other, who is the greatest monster of all time?
All right.
Here we go.